Welcome. This is Dr. Bertalan, the medical futurist, and I'm so glad that we can have another live Q&A session here. The reason why we have these live Q&A sessions is because first, we cannot meet in person in conference halls and lecture halls around the world. I don't think I will travel for another year or so. So it makes sense to build a different kind of communication channel. And I have been really enjoying these sessions with you, and I hope that some of you can take part in this and ask questions. Today's topic is a very sensitive topic, and we've been struggling with covering this at depth in the last couple of months at the Medical Futurist, but we finally did. The topic today is your privacy in the digital health era. So not just privacy in general, but what you need to know about your privacy on many levels. We will talk about this in details, and what you can do to try to protect what's vulnerable and protect your data that is worth more than oil right now. So first of all, thank you so much for those who are already here. I will check out the chat and we will look for questions throughout the next 60 minutes. Our editor-in-chief, Judith Kusko, will be here too, and she will help us with sharing links and analysis that we published already. And she will also help me choose the next questions. And I prepared a few things for you today because talking about privacy is a very complicated issue. Not only because it is in theory a complicated issue, but because how do you start talking about privacy? We all know that there are privacy issues in digital health and in healthcare in general. The way we use social media and smartphones and all the technologies around us, these make us ask the question, what if my privacy is leaking? What if someone else, like a third party, a bad actor, can have access to my private information? So it makes sense to talk about that, but it's really hard to find out how to address this issue, from what angle, from what perspective we should start with first. And I want to start with a question in the chat coming from Michael Neuwirth. It's a great question about one of the core issues of digital health. How can patients play a role during the development of digital health products to help protect their privacy? I love the question because it makes me think about patient design. I'm sure you've heard the expression patient centricity, and it has been around for many years. And now more and more pharma companies and governments and healthcare providers realize that patients are important. It's obvious for us, but maybe not for them so much. And they have been talking about that they have to put patients in the center. But patient design is a different thing. Patient design means that you include patients on the highest level of decision making in the company. The Food and Drug Administration in the US, one of the major regulators, has a patient advisory board now. I know by fact that many pharma companies, even some governments, are working on creating patient advisory boards. So I think the only way to make sure that we protect what's vulnerable is by not just asking patients what they want to see with the end product, but by involving them from the very first step throughout the whole process of designing that product. So thank you and you did already share the article we have on patient design. So thank you, Michael, for the great question. We also received many questions in advance through the Eventbrite website, and I will try to share as many as I can, and also I will try to answer as many as I can. But I really prepared a few things for you, so I want to go through those. And the whole reason why we are here today and why we talk about privacy is actually this. I hope you know that we have many executive summaries and ebooks available on leanpub.com. We have one about the future of artificial intelligence, future of pharma, one about the 40 most exciting questions about medicine and healthcare, one about tech giants in healthcare, one about the future of the top 20 medical specialties. The top 100 companies is for free for now. You have to know that. We have one about the top trends in 2020, and the newest one, privacy in the digital health era. In this ebook, we really try to tackle the beast. For the last few months, the whole editorial team behind the Medical Futurist has been working on covering this issue. And we came up with the idea that maybe we should have a sort of guideline or guide that we could follow when talking about how technologies and the use of technologies impact our privacy. And we came up with this 3 level. The first level is that the traditional, your data being in healthcare institutions. I'm talking about your medical records When you have an X-ray, then the hospital has the X-ray image stored in their systems or in the cloud, but within their systems. So there is one huge group which everyone knows about, the traditional, the healthcare hospitals, private practices, your primary care professional, using and storing your data. That's one thing. The second level is going to be the new, when medical data stored on your technologies. So we will talk about how the technologies we use today can impact our privacy. I'm talking about fitness smartwatches, smartphones, ECG devices, portable diagnostic devices, genetic tests, and so on. And the third level of your health data is the future. Medical data stored where you aren't even aware of, like artificial intelligence. We'll talk about practical examples about that. Your data stored in the cloud, in the third-party applications or services that you are using. So I will use these three groups of data, three groups of issues to go through everything about your privacy. And of course, I will try to come up with some practical recommendations too. That ebook also contains practical recommendations. So we don't want to leave you in the forest. We want to help you with real, first steps that you can take to make sure that you protect what's really important to you. So, and in the meantime, thank you for the questions that you can ask. Please feel free to ask as many as you can, and I will try to answer all of them. But I wanted to start with a question we received in advance from Roshan Khan. And the question was about everyone shares everything on Facebook and Twitter and use the Gmail account and still says that they are worried about privacy. Well, I get the challenge in the question. I see how it tries to poke people. The truth is that whatever technology you are using, your privacy is exposed. But I mean, we can stop using these technologies, these services, and maybe move to a forest and become a monk. Because even if you're not a geek and you don't work in a profession where you need to use these advanced technologies, you will still receive care in some form. And even if you don't want AI to be used in your care, your medical records will still be available to the hospital system. So either way, your data will be stored somewhere else, not just in your own systems. Therefore, I don't see how we can stop using these technologies, but I can see how we should be aware of who handles our data, how they handle it, and what we can do to try to protect what's important to us. So I get a question. I think we will, based on the questions we also received, I will try to go through a few things about how social media accounts store information about us and what kind of information they are aware of and how you can disable some of these services. So we will dive into that. And starting with the first issue, the traditional healthcare institutions, private practices, hospitals, storing your data. I think it also raises the question about who should regulate those kinds of services. And of course, we are thinking about policymakers here who create policies and develop incentives for medical professionals and healthcare providers to make it happen, to protect our sensitive data. But then the first thing that comes to mind whenever we talk about policymakers regulating healthcare data, I hope you remember this very weird conversation that Mark Zuckerberg had with some US senators 2 years ago. He was asked about, as far as I remember, he was asked about how Facebook makes money when Facebook has billions of users, but it has no, real life practical product. How does he make money? And he said that, Senator, we run ads. And that was such, even Mark smiled, and it doesn't happen too often. But it was such a funny thing to see that as a US senator not understanding how Facebook works. Because then the next question that pops up into my mind is, if they don't understand how Facebook works, how will they understand genetic testing services and health sensors and using artificial intelligence for medical decision making? Can you imagine this happening? So this is quite a risk that you are taking here, and we have to know about this. And then when you talk about medical records and whether you are able to download your records, the first idea I had was the patient CV movement that started about 2 years ago. I remember patients sharing their patient CVs. It's like, let me zoom in for you a little bit. You think I can? No, I cannot. So patient CVs were about the idea that when a patient goes to a new medical professional, they cannot expect physicians to have a great image about the patient's case in a second or so. So they started creating their own patient CVs, not based on education and background, but what kind of tests they've had so far, what kind of diagnosis they received, what treatments they've had, what prescriptions they've received from their physicians, trying to help medical professionals get a clearer picture in a few minutes by looking at the patient CV. So do you see what the point I'm trying to make here? That it's not about that the health IT systems are getting better. It's about we patients have to get better to at least reach a stage where we can receive the care that we ask for. And when I get questions about longevity and how cryopreservation and very science fiction like far-fetched technologies could help us live longer, I always ask back, can you download your medical records right now from your healthcare institution? Because if not, then what is your expectation? How can we use these other technologies to get the most out of our care? So I think it starts with that, being able to download what belongs to us. I mean, you have paid for your medical data, for your medical records. You pay taxes, you pay health insurance, and that's how that data belongs to you. But in many cases, not because they don't want to give it to you, but because that's how the system has always been designed, to exclude you, the patient. And I don't want to start a revolution today. I'm not talking against medical professionals or health institutions in general. I'm talking about the fact that patients have not been part of the healthcare discussion for so long, since Hippocrates. And the only thing that changed this is that in the 21st century, certain technologies started breaking down the ivory tower of medicine. Social media, Amazon, global supply chains, the access to new and advanced technologies, all these started leading to an ivory tower that is no more. So I can access the same studies, I can access the same technology, the same information. And that's why it's so hard for us to understand that I have to ask for my data to come to me. It's not normal. It's not the common way that I own my health information. One of my favorite examples is e-patient Dave's movement called "Give Me My Damn Data," which he started not more than 10 years ago, and he has been quite an advocate for this. And now I think I go back to answering a few questions, and thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing so many of your questions. Wow, there is a really good provoking question from Blaze. Wow, I'm not so good with names. Jakolkovsky. I hope I could pronounce it well enough. How much data regarding my health is Google collecting without me knowing it? When I use Google services, in particular, its search engine. Anything that you use from any of these companies, especially Google, when you register, you accept the terms and conditions. I'm sure you read the whole thing like I did. Of course not. So you know that in many cases you agreed already that the company can store your data, can access your data, but it's not like someone is sitting behind the desk accessing your private information. It's more like artificial intelligence based algorithms scrolling through your data to give you better search engine results, to give you better advertisements, either in search results or through social media accounts. And that's why your data is being exposed to those companies. When you use Facebook and you talk with someone while your phone is around you, I think you've had the experience that even on that day you started receiving ads about the topics that you had in the lively conversation. That's creepy, but it has a microphone and it can check. It has a sort of language understanding, and then it uses the data, that information, to give you better search results. In my case, I'm fine as long as an algorithm is checking that, and I can still disable it. And when you go into your Google account, you can disable many of these services. Personalized search results, advertisements. You can check what kind of profile Google has made about you over the time that you have been using its services. It knows your gender, your age, your hobbies, your preferences, your taste in music, and movies and so many other things that you don't want others to know about you. But you can disable many of these, like in Google Maps, you can disable Google to track your location GPS wise. So there are some things that you can do, but I'm not sure if you can become completely invisible for these companies. So it will keep on going on. In the case of Google, as they have no real healthcare services, they will know as much health information about you as much as you share by writing emails on Gmail, by doing search queries for health issues, for saving something on Google Drive. But again, an algorithm will check those data, those pieces of information for giving you better search results and ads in general. All right, thank you for the question. There are some questions coming in live. Okay, there is one from, it's called Believer Blogs. I'm getting there. So now, will tech giants like Amazon and Google change the pharma sector forever? How do you see the data privacy in this case? These are two quite big questions. About the first one, we published the ebook Tech Giants in Healthcare, as I mentioned before, in which we try to tackle this whole issue. And I think that in many ways, pharma will be challenged, but they will not vanish from the market, because the experience and the human resources they have from the past 100, for some of them 200 years, you can't replace it with a tech company. The one thing that tech companies will always be much better than pharma companies is how people want to use the products that they are creating for them. Smartphones, search engines, tech services. That's a field where there is no competitor for tech giants, especially coming from pharma. But the other thing where I think tech giants will never be as good as pharma companies are is regulation and understanding healthcare in general. And that's why I think we will not see tech giants becoming pharma companies or pharma companies starting developing tech products for their consumers, but a sort of new kind of collaboration between such companies, making sure that as a pharma company, I can give a device, a sensor, a technological tool to my patients. And with my medication, that tool and the medication could be the jackpot combination. In exchange, the tech giants will get a new market for their tech services. I think we will see such examples quite soon. One of my favorite ones, it's not from a tech giant, but a technology company. When the pharma company Roche acquired the award-winning Austrian diabetes application MySugar. So now Roche can provide their medication with the award-winning app. And I think that's a really rewarding combination for healthcare providers. About the second part of the question, that's going to be a nightmare scenario. So when you can decide whether you can, enter a clinical trial that focuses on the specific customized treatment that you need, but it means there would be a huge breach of your privacy. Then, how do you make a good decision here? Of course, you will go into the trial while losing your data. So when we have to make such decisions ourselves, then we are going to live through a 1984 kind of scenario where tech giants and pharma companies won't care about our privacy so much, but their, business needs. I'm not saying this is a conspiracy theory. I think it's a fact that they focus more on their business needs than the individual patient's privacy. I'm sure they will do anything they can to protect some parts of our privacy, but I'm afraid that if we have to rely on our governments and policymakers making that happen, that kind of protection, then we will have a few more years ahead of us having these very difficult discussions about this. All right. Wow, that is a great question coming in the chat. It's from Prince Chikizi. Do you think international health data laws will keep up with complexities of privacy? Can we truly trust big tech corporations? No, But the first one, that's a really exciting question because we wrote an article recently about how digital health makes healthcare globalized. If you think about it, now to receive the best potential care in that country, you can only meet healthcare professionals in that country the way your provider or your insurance company makes you meet them. And that's it. But what if right now I can submit a cancerous tissue to a Belgian startup where they can sequence the genome of that tissue, helping me find out what clinical trials are open, focusing on the genomic differences I have in my cancerous tissue, maybe using a cloud database in the US on the Amazon servers. And then there would be a clinical trial on a Spanish island made by a French pharma company inviting patients like me. In that scenario, I would get the world's most up-to-date targeted therapy for my cancerous tissue while I didn't even meet anyone in my healthcare system, which I'm paying for through taxes and health insurance. I'm not saying that's an ideal scenario, but digital health creates that opportunity for patients. And I'm sure when patients find out they have a choice, they will reach out to such startups and technologies. So yeah, maybe an international FDA, an international body of regulators would be needed to make sure we still access products that are safe and regulated. But for now, we patients are on our own. You can ask your medical professionals for guidance, but you must be very lucky to find someone who can help you with such issues. So I'm afraid I'm a little bit pessimistic about that for now. We had one question before about from Andrew Nikitin. Let me share it with you. Here it is. It's a bit long. Maybe now. So, which of the owners of public health data seems to be you the most reliable? The state, medical facilities, or patients? I get the general question, who we should trust with our health data if we can make a choice. If I had to make a choice, then, looking at my own data, I have been making choices. There are some companies, private companies, that I trusted with my health data. I'm sure my Fitbit, through my Fitbit sensors, Fitbit can access 5 years of my health data going back in time. I'm sure that some of the companies I order genetic tests from, they can access my quite sensitive private information, even the results of my genetic tests. And in many cases, I check that I don't want them to sell my data to third parties, not even in an anonymized way. I have doubts whether all of them complied, and I think some of them still sold the data because they thought that genomic data could be anonymized, but I think scientifically that's impossible. There are some healthcare institutions like my primary care practice, which I trust with my health data, and I made that choice. I had primary care physicians before, but I wasn't so fine with them privacy-wise, and I wasn't so excited about their level of knowledge of technologies. But the one I have, the primary care physician I have now, she's really amazing, and of course I'm happy to trust her with my health data. And then there are data which I own and I store in my own systems because I think I trust those services and those basic technologies like Google Drive in a password protected way that I use day by day. But there is no clear-cut answer to this, and you are definitely not in a position where you can make the decision whether you want all your health data to be in one place or in the hands of one company or one healthcare institution. That's not going to be the case. But the more you know about this, maybe the more you can prepare to avoid your data being leaked to third parties or bad actors. So thank you for the question. Just for a moment, I would love to jump back to an issue that I wanted to talk to you about, which is more about the second level. Let me go back to where we were before. We have been tackling and talking about the traditional, maybe 25 minutes were enough about that. Let's talk about the new, the technologies that you use and the privacy you have on those technologies. And I wanted to share with you how I experienced this myself as a patient, maybe a patient from the future. because these are and I just do a compilation now. These are the technologies that I use quite often. Like I have a sleep tracker, so I have my sleep data, my sleep quality stored in the cloud through through a third-party service. I've been using a fitness tracker, a smartwatch, for more than 5 years now, so I have that data stored on a Fitbit account. I've been using some devices to measure stress. I've been using some headbands to get better at meditation by getting immediate feedback. I've had now about 6 genetic tests, and one of them was a whole genome sequencing. So my full DNA is available, DNA information is available through that service. It means 6 companies can access my sensitive piece of information through my genetic results. And I even had a microbiome test with 3 different services. So can you imagine in how many ways my data is leaking? You might think that I do this a bit too much, but the reason why I have to test so many services is that now I can tell you which ones are accurate, which ones are safe and reliable, and which ones are not. This way we can also talk about the privacy issues that actually most of you will have in the near future. You will be able to avoid using such services, but then you have to say out loud that you are fine with whatever information your, for example, primary care physician has about you. And even if you could obtain a bit more about your risks for conditions genetically, your diet based on your microbiome, your fitness level every day, but you choose not to. So the data they have about you is enough for you. And that's your choice and your right. My right is that I want that data to be used in medical decision making when it comes to my own medical case. So I make a decision here. First, I have to decide how much of my privacy I'm willing to give up in exchange for a chance for a longer and healthier life. So even though I use all these services and measure all these things about myself, it doesn't mean that I will, live longer and healthier than you. Maybe I have a chance, but that's not even certain. So that's the best decision, the best balance we can keep here. And I'm sure that my privacy is leaking, but at least I feel like I'm the one still making a decision about this. All right. Let's go through the questions. And thank you so much for being with us here. And I really thank you for the many questions. I'm trying to go through as many as we can. Wow. There is one question about, again, tech giants. It seems like when it comes to privacy, some of you are really excited about tech giants or interested in how tech giants can handle your private data. Can Google, Amazon, Facebook, others buy my health data? And can they buy it from my hospital? It's a really good question because in theory they cannot. When you have medical records stored in a hospital system, your name, your gender, your age, your address, your private security number, many things that can help identify you are included in those medical records. So if someone gets access to that, they can identify that medical information that diagnoses those treatments and medications, and they can assign it to you personally. And that's, of course, a very serious breach of privacy. But there are cases when healthcare institutions try to de-anonymize these data sets, like removing your name, your age, your address, your private security number, anything that can help really identify you. If they know your gender, your age, and your medical condition, then it's almost impossible to identify you. But if they know your, more private numbers, then it becomes possible. So it's possible that these companies buy such data from your hospital, but in the vast majority of cases, they make sure that they will not be able to identify you based on that information. What's different though, and it happened actually before, and it's a bit about the third level of this system that we have been talking about, the future medical data stored where you aren't aware of. And the first idea that came to my mind about this is when Google's DeepMind company tried to get access to millions of retina scans and they wanted to buy such data from a UK-based medical service because they had access to such retina scans. And the problem is, based on retina scan, I don't think any person can be identified. But it's still that data, that retina scan still belongs to patients. And when the hospital sold that data to DeepMind, it was without consent from patients. So you see that open-ended question, that strange situation here. You cannot be identified based on the retina scan, but in theory it still belongs to you. So you should be the one deciding whether you offer it for services or whether you sell it to third-party services. So you give them access to your retina scan for money. But that's not the case. So such breaches happen, and it's really hard to find out how to solve such issues. And now let me defend DeepMind. Without a lot of data, a lot of labeled useful medical data, it's physically impossible to develop artificial intelligence-based services. And we want to have AI-based medical decision support systems. We want radiologists and ophthalmologists to get help from AI. But again, you cannot get to those systems without feeding it with a lot of labeled, annotated data. And that must come from you. It cannot come from individuals. It would take decades. So we have to make a compromise here. I think if we cannot be identified based on that data, then in theory, I would be okay with that data to be used for developing AI-based systems that in the long term could help me and my medical professional make better decisions about my medical case. Well, that's how complicated the issue of privacy is these days. So thank you for the great question. Yeah, thank you for some other questions also focused on making data anonymized, and I think we have covered this sort of. Gina Apple asked a question about blockchain, and it's a really exciting topic because blockchain for many years has been like one of the unicorn technologies of healthcare and pharma. And the way blockchain works, it is indeed capable of really protecting private information. But it only works if many healthcare institutions start using it. It only works if pharma companies start using it. So as long as it's just an idea in the minds of some startups and some private companies, that's not going to happen. So we would love to have regulators who understand blockchain, and I haven't seen many, and then they could start helping healthcare institutions implement blockchain into practice. Because I have no doubts that the technology itself indeed can help us protect what's really vulnerable. Tarun George has an interesting question about the topic I just briefly covered here, which is about my thoughts on AI assistance in electronic medical record platforms in assisting doctors in diagnosis and prescription. Of course, that's the long-term vision that many innovators in AI have in mind, that we keep on using the traditional, we keep on uploading information to medical records, but what if an AI-based system could go through those medical records and look for nuances, tiny differences that might indicate that I might develop a disease later on? You see, it would be an amazing assistant to the medical professional. But first of all, for such systems to be developed, you need them to be fed with data that come from us. So we need to share medical records with them so they can get better at that. And we don't see so many examples in that so far. And we need medical institutions that would allow such companies to get access to those medical records. And we need companies developing such AI-based systems that also understand that they need to be able to answer real clinical questions. I'm not saying it's not happening. Babylon Health, as far as I know, and some similar companies have been working on that, but I don't see this yet on a wider scale. But I have no doubts that at the end of the day, that's the end of the line. We will have AI-based assistants for medical professionals. If not through medicine, then I think, or I'm afraid, patients will make it happen. So I think there's a chance that in my country, I will use an AI-based system to help me deal with the huge amount of data I can obtain about myself. Then, when my medical professional would use such a system looking through my medical records. I'm not trying to be funny here. I just see that there's a bigger chance for that because I can reach out to these technologies in a much simpler way than how my medical institutions can implement AI into practice. So thank you for that question. Wow, Prince Chikazi has another great question about the role of physicians in all this. And that's a really crucial question because the point is, as a patient from the future, you've seen how much data I can obtain about myself and what services and technologies I can reach out to directly. But I'm alone then in a bunch of data. You understand? I'm in the jungle of digital information, and without the supporting help, the support from a medical professional, I will be doomed and lost in that jungle of information. So the physician I have has a very important role. They have to be the guide for me in that jungle of health and digital information. And you cannot become guides without getting the right education about that. And we've checked, there are only about 5 to 10 medical curriculums worldwide where they teach such practices and such knowledge about privacy issues in digital health. And there are hundreds or thousands of medical schools worldwide. And second, you need to use these technologies yourself. Otherwise, you will never understand what kind of privacy breaches are possible and what anxiety patients go through when they use these technologies. So I encourage many physicians to start at least use a smartwatch or any basic digital health technology, because then they will understand better what's going on in the minds of their patient. Eric Vanderhulst has an amazing point. Let me share this with you. I really love this point, and thank you for sharing that without shared personal health data, even Vesalius would not have been able to practice medicine hundreds of years ago. That's exactly the case. So it can never be about a complete block of privacy. It will never work in a way that I don't allow any of my data to be health data to be shared with anyone else. It's physically impossible. And it's not that I'm happy to share everything I have because, what do I have to lose? You have a lot to lose. I hope you remember Edward Snowden had a quote about this, that thinking that I have nothing to hide, so I don't care about privacy, is like saying that I don't care about the freedom of speech because I have nothing to say. That's the question we have to keep in mind. We need to receive better care. That only happens through the use of digital health technologies. We have been talking about that for over a decade now at the Medical Futurist. We cannot develop those technologies without our private data. So it's not about a block, it's about a better synergy between companies developing those technologies and us patients sharing our data. And we should feel safe and protected while doing that so we can get better services. So it's, at the end of the day, it's a trust issue. It's a trust issue that we have with our health government, with our health insurance company, with our healthcare professionals, with the companies we are buying technologies from. If they can find the right communication to build trust and build relationship with us on the long term, I think they are on the right track. But it hasn't been happening so often in my experience. Wow. Ellen Esty has a very exciting question that I want to share with you. Wow. Do clinicians have a responsibility to let patients know AI was a part of their diagnosis? There's been some cases of these medical algorithms outputting biased results due to the data input. Excellent questions, two different questions. About the first one, when Professor Lenneck came up with the first stethoscope, and I want to share this amazing innovation with you. So I'm talking about this one. When Lenneck came up with the first stethoscope 200 years ago, I'm sure that he had to describe what kind of device he is using whenever he tried to get information and listen to the cardiac and lung sounds of patients, because patients were adjusted to the notion that physicians don't use any innovation. They just come in and with their knowledge they treat them. But then it started being different. They saw the stethoscope in the hands of their patient, in the physicians. So I guess they asked, "I'm sorry, doctor, what is that thing in your hand?" And then they described it as a stethoscope. It helps me augment the sound so I can make even better decisions for you. You know, decades later, or maybe years later, no one asked about stethoscopes. You don't ask your physician why is she or he using a stethoscope on you, because that's part of providing care. I think we will have a similar learning curve with AI. First, you will ask if and how AI was used in medical decision making, and then after first 3-5 visits and first 3-5 questions, we will stop asking because it will be obvious that they used. Maybe we will ask after a few years that I just want to make sure that you used an AI assistive service while making the decision with me about my disease, right? I just want to make sure that your decision was supported by an artificial intelligence. I think that's the learning curve we will go through in the coming years or so. Bias is a different issue. Of course, many algorithms can make mistakes if the data is not accurate enough that they are feeding the AI with. Data can be biased. I think I said this example before in one of the live Q&As. If I want to create an algorithm for looking at profile pictures and determining whether that person is a scientist, I guess I would feed the algorithm with 200 years of scientist profile pictures, and I would allow the algorithm to find out features that might make it think that that person is a scientist. Obviously, the algorithm would never think of a woman that she can be a scientist, because there haven't been too many women scientists over the last 200 years. It's not because women cannot be scientists, but because the data was biased. It came from a wrong source. So in medicine, in many cases, we will still have bias in AI, because you need policymakers, developers, and healthcare professionals, all of them understanding what kind of bias can be found in my AI algorithm before even designing the algorithm. That's how they can make sure to remove bias from their systems. But that's maybe a point for a different discussion. And yes, Eric, that many of these questions are in fact ethical questions. I don't think there are black and white answers, but there are notions and ideas that we want to keep in mind while trying to find a balance for ourselves individually. Yeah. Anshuman Sa, thank you for a question or suggestion. Please make more videos about AI in healthcare. We have published many videos about AI in healthcare. If you go to my YouTube channel, and you are on my channel right now, you can just do a search for artificial intelligence, and I think you will find over 20 videos in which I've been trying to tackle this very complicated issue from many perspectives. I hope you will find those useful. Sure. Prince Chickasee asked questions about a question about cyber attacks, and this is such an important issue because I want to share this recent news with you. This is something terrifying. I mean, questions come out. Okay, that's not the source I'm looking for. Questions come out quite often about privacy issues, cyber attacks. You keep on hearing about these, but this story is terrifying. A patient in Düsseldorf University Hospital died during a cyber attack, and it might happen to you too. It might happen to me too. I'm not sure I'm sure that 99% of hospitals worldwide don't have a cybersecurity expert working in a team. So they are quite vulnerable to attacks from outside. And there are bad actors who will not care about human lives. So they will keep on attacking those services, trying to steal patient data that they can sell to pharma companies or the third actors. That's in the game now, but it's really terrifying. So we need to make sure that cybersecurity experts assist healthcare companies hospitals, pharma companies, healthcare insurance companies, because they need to make sure that they can really protect our data against such attacks. I think in the vast majority of cases now, it would not be the case. These bad actors would just go through the system like they did in Düsseldorf about 2 weeks ago. So it's really terrifying. And the questions about cyber attacks and compromising data privacy. What are your biggest fear and possible solutions health systems should consider exploring? My fear is not only about that my data could be sold or stolen, but that it will lead to long-term consequences. Like if I have a pre-existing condition that you can see on my genomic profile, then maybe no health insurance company will give me insurance because they get access to that. For them, that would be a really expensive piece of information, but they could save a lot of money by knowing that piece of information. And that would just not be fair because I haven't exposed my private data. The technologies, the government, the health insurance companies I used expose my private data, and that's not my responsibility. Still, I will live with the consequences. That's my biggest fear. The possible solution would include good enough regulations against cyber attacks, a lot of investment going into that, healthcare professionals, policymakers and researchers being knowledgeable about these impacts and all the potential attacks. And we are really far from that. As I mentioned before, if they don't understand Facebook, how will they protect us from such cyber attacks? I don't think they will, because they won't understand even the basics of those issues. All right, there are a few more questions left, and I'm trying to go through all of them. There is one from Maria Charles. Here is the question. All right. So how can we make people feel comfortable with the idea of using their data to develop digital health tools without their consent? In circumstances where gathering consent would be impossible to do. I believe in transparent communication. As we have discussed before, I know that my data is needed for these advanced technologies to be developed, and I'm personally fine with that. I know that my data will be anonymized, and in some cases that's almost impossible. I'm also fine with that. But I need transparent communication from the company developing the AI algorithm using my data, the hospital providing access to my data, and the health government making this new collaboration happen. I need transparent communication from them. I think if they just try to explain this to people in general, then a lot more people would be open to the idea that they would understand that without our data, there is no digital health. I cannot become the point of care. There is no artificial intelligence. It's not about I have to provide my medical records with my name and my social security number to the public. It's just that in some cases, some of my data could be used by third parties without identifying me. I would be more than fine with that. So it should be an opt-out system, but you can only gain such a level of trust from your patients, from your consumers, from your citizens, if you transparently communicate about the potential risks and the potential benefits along the way. And I'm not saying I haven't seen good examples about that, because there are some, like the way Denmark or the government of Germany, New Zealand, Australia have been communicating about this, has been exemplary for me. But there are 200 more countries not doing that so well. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to do for those countries too. So thank you for the question. Wow, Shruti Dvivedi, that's an amazing question, and I like the way you're really poking me and challenging me, and these are really exciting yet complicated questions. What is the existing gap we are looking at in the area of data and privacy from a patient's perspective? I think the gap is not for traditional patients who are not so in favor of using technologies in their care. I think the gap is more for patients like me who would love advanced technologies to be used in my care, and I would love my caregivers to use such technologies, but I don't get the chance for that. What I see is I want to make it happen, so I have to reach out to the use of those technologies. I have to buy a genetic test myself. I have to use an ECG device. So my privacy is not leaking on one channel, it's leaking on 20, because that's how I can try to make it happen that I become the point of care. Instead of just my government creating an ecosystem where I can just get into the system and use all these amazing services, and then my privacy will be leaking in one channel. That's the gap, I think, that is being widening. That has been widening in the last couple of years, and we are. I mean, this curve is quite far from the end of it. This curve is just getting bigger. So people like me, there are a few millions of patients like me, but when we have tens of millions and hundreds of millions of patients using technologies, smartwatches, ECG sensors, genetic services, then we will have a new level of ethical nightmare in our society. One of my favorite examples about this actually happened in Iceland, where they sequenced the genomes of tens of thousands of Icelandic people, and the government did that with a private company, Decode Me. And in theory, they had a chance to tell some patients that they had a higher chance for a certain medical condition, the genetic risk for breast or ovarian cancer. And they couldn't do that because that would be a serious breach of privacy. But you see the point here. By doing that, they would give the patient a chance to live decades longer, but that would be a breach of privacy. So how about creating an opt-in system where if you want to know about such risks, you can ask the company, the government, or both to give you access to your results, and then you can take some precautions and do whatever is needed to be done. So that's how the gap we see for patients. Raimund has a great question about COVID, and that's a fair question, because in the age of COVID, the level of privacy, and that's why in the ebook that we published, we have a different section about COVID-19, because we had to cover this in details. Because in the COVID-19 world, what happens that with contact tracing, you don't really have a choice. If your country makes you use contact tracing after being tested positive for a virus, and they do it through an application, then you are forced to allow some leakage from your privacy. But if the government can do it in the right way, again with transparent communication, then I think we're on the right track. If they tell me that, well, if I opt in to use the contact tracing app, then maybe I can leave quarantine a bit sooner, because they can make sure that I haven't left quarantine based on my GPS data, from cell data from my smartphone. So you see, some minor contracts can be made between actors, governments, and the individual patients and citizens when it comes to their privacy during COVID-19. But still, in many countries, we've seen examples where they just simply force people to use these services. And in those countries, the breach of privacy is an everyday issue. So I'm not sure it happened in those countries because of COVID. I think in those countries that has been the case even before the pandemic. But the pandemic has only made this issue bigger, because it's it happens faster and it's more in the spotlight now than ever before. All right. We have time for a few more questions in the next few more minutes. Wow, Dr. Charanyot Singh has a question about an exciting issue: patients with pacemakers and cybersecurity. I hope you've heard about Hugo Campos, an amazing individual who has been having a pacemaker implanted, actually a defibrillator implanted into his heart tissue because of a heart disease that he has. And he actually went to courses to learn about how such devices are made, because he wanted to make sure that the device that can save his life and that his life depends on works well enough. It was designed the right way, and everything else was in place. So he learned the code behind the system, the device, and so on. And I remember him asking the company for the source code. So he can again double check if everything is all right in the device. And of course, for business secret reasons, he didn't get access to the source code, and there have been battles, legal battles about this. So first of all, it is possible now, we've seen studies, it's possible now to hack such medical devices from afar. Not just devices like pacemakers, but also insulin pumps and other devices using, for example, Bluetooth connection. It is possible to hack them. I'm not saying it's simple, but even if in theory it's possible and you have such a device, it must be a hell of an anxiety. So what you can expect the companies making the devices available to make sure that cybersecurity is strong enough in the background that they can protect you from such attacks. I'm not sure about that in the vast majority of cases. So that's the issue that patients have to face. And the more technologies we will use in our care, and not just simpler medical devices, but also artificial intelligence, AI-based cloud services, genomic, personalized genomic services, and so on, the more risks, I'm afraid, we will have to face when it comes to our health. While on the other side of this equation, we will benefit from that data, from those additional analysis, from that medical decision support system, and we might be able to live decades longer if our data can be protected. You see, that's a very strange vicious circle, which I don't see how governments and companies can protect, but that's why we have these discussions. So maybe we can push them in the right way, in the right direction. Ooh, Richard M. Ballarant, thank you for this really great question. And it pokes the monster here. It's about, do you believe that there will always be a significant group who refuse to share data, like anti-vaxxers? I think these are two different issues. One is about people who will never share data. And it must be understandable, and it must be their individual choice and personal right not to do that. The issue is they have that right already. Anyone can do that, but I cannot do the opposite. So we are fighting for the rights of patients who would love to contribute to developing digital health technologies, and in the meantime would love to benefit from using those by sharing their data. I think both groups have their future, and we must make it possible for both groups to enjoy their own benefits. But the other part is different. Anti-vaxxers is not a group of people who won't share data. It's a group of people who goes against science and the recommendations of the medical community. And it's a risk, it's a threat and a risk for everyone else out there living in this society. So in that case, it's different. And I'm afraid in their case, the issue that we face is that they can be really loud in the online world while we cannot, or maybe us scientists and medical professionals, our voice has to be subtle and sensitive and objective, while they can be as loud as they want to be. And we have to find our ways of fighting back and fighting back in a way that the consumers and patients understand the risks and they can make their own individual choices by following scientific and medical recommendations. Thank you for the nice messages from India. I see that there are many people from India here, so welcome to the channel. And maybe we have time for one more question coming from Jabil Sunny. What is the danger of AI making the wrong decisions? It's a great question because it implies the legal responsibility here, which I think AI will not have. If your physician makes a decision about your case, and your physician used his or her stethoscope while making the decision, you would never ask that why isn't the stethoscope responsible for the bad decision? You would make the physician responsible for the decision. The same will apply to artificial intelligence. If the physician used that stethoscope or that AI algorithm in the right way, the way that technology was regulated, then the physician will be responsible. The technology brings out the wrong data or information, the maker of the technology will be responsible. If the physician uses the AI in the wrong way, then the physician will be responsible. Just like if they use their stethoscope in the wrong way, not hearing your cardiac issue, and they make a wrong decision, of course they are responsible, not the stethoscope. I think that's how this legal issue about AI will be solved in the near future. So Thank you so much for being with us in the last hour or so. I'm really grateful to all of you, and we will keep on doing these live sessions every second week because we want to conquer as many exciting topics as possible. I think in the next couple of weeks, we will talk about the future of medical specialties and what career medical students might want to pursue when it comes to digital health. I'm sure we will talk about genetic services and genomic services, artificial intelligence in details, and many other exciting topics. So I'm really grateful to all of you for being here with us, and I hope that you can join the next sessions as well. Just as a last recommendation again, we have 8 executive summaries published on leanpub.com, and the newest one is called Your Privacy in the Digital Health Era, and we believe we covered every major point in that very sensitive, very complex subject. Again, just to go through that again, from the traditional, the way your data is stored in healthcare institutions, through the new, when your medical technologies have your data, to the future, which you don't even know, when you don't even know where your data can be found, in artificial intelligence, in the cloud, and so on. And we also, after every section, we have a whole list of practical recommendations from using strong passwords to two-step authentications and so many other things that you can do and keep in mind to try to protect what is vulnerable. Because again, your health data is worth more than oil. So you need to know about these issues. And if I might end up with one simple recommendation or just, food for thought, then we might want to elect politicians who know what's going on and understand what digital health is, what the potentials could be if used in the right way, and what the risks could be when a bad actor is in the game. So thank you again for being here. The recording of the session will be, of course, available online for free, and hopefully see you in about 2 weeks from now on. Thank you and have a nice day.